Lyra, the alien princess, was once loved and admired by everyone in her kingdom. She had a father who adored her and was proud of her bright future. But everything changed when her stepmother, Queen Siran, arrived. Queen Siran was beautiful and powerful, but she hated Lyra from the start. She saw Lyra as a threat to her own power and wanted to take the throne for herself. For years, Lyra's father had been trying to keep peace in the kingdom, but Queen Siran's jealousy grew stronger with each passing day. She could see that Lyra had something special, something that could make her a true ruler. But it wasn't something that could be controlled. Lyra had a strange ability to manipulate energy. It was like she could feel the very life force of the world around her, shaping it into whatever she wanted. However, her powers were unpredictable, and she struggled to understand them fully. One day, when Lyra was practicing her powers in the royal gardens, something went terribly wrong. The energy she had summoned became too much for her to handle. It exploded, shaking the ground beneath her feet. Flowers turned to dust, trees cracked, and the sky above turned a shade of red. People nearby screamed in fear. Queen Siran seized the moment. "She's a danger to us all," she declared coldly, her voice echoing across the palace. "She is a monster, unfit to rule." The king tried to defend his daughter, but his voice was drowned out by the harsh words of the queen. Eventually, he gave in. Lyra's powers were too dangerous, and she was a threat to the future of the kingdom. In the dead of night, when the palace was quiet and still, Lyra was taken by guards, told that she was to be sent far away. She was exiled to a remote planet, abandoned by the very people who once loved her. Alone, with no friends, no family, and no future, Lyra was left to survive on a desolate world. The planet was far from civilization, an unknown world that had been untouched by anyone for centuries. The sky was a dull gray, and the land was barren, filled with sharp rocks and endless stretches of dust. Lyra could feel the weight of her new life crushing her. She had nothing here, no purpose and no hope. Her powers, once a source of wonder, now seemed like a curse. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Lyra wandered the planet, trying to find food, water, and shelter. She kept her powers hidden, too afraid to use them. She had learned the hard way that her abilities were too dangerous for anyone to see. Every time she used them, she felt the world shake beneath her feet, as though her energy could destroy everything in her path. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a strange purple glow over the land, Lyra sat alone by a dried-up riverbed. She felt the emptiness of her existence more deeply than ever. It was as if the entire universe had forgotten her. Just then, she noticed something unusual in the sky. A small dot grew larger, slowly descending toward the surface. It was a ship, an unfamiliar ship, one she had never seen before. Her heart raced. Could this be a sign? Could someone finally be coming to rescue her? Or was this just another trick of the universe, another cruel reminder that she was forgotten? Lyra's thoughts raced as the ship touched down gently on the ground. The door opened, and a figure stepped out. He was tall, dressed in a dark uniform, and looked around carefully, scanning the area. Lyra felt a surge of hope, but she quickly tried to hide, not wanting to be seen. She had learned not to trust anyone, especially strangers. But something about this man felt different. There was no fear in his eyes, no hesitation. The man spoke, his voice calm and steady. "Hello? Is anyone here?" Lyra hesitated. She wasn't sure if she should answer, but the loneliness inside her made the decision for her. Slowly, she stood up and stepped out of the shadows. The man's eyes widened when he saw her. She could see the surprise in his face, but there was no fear, just curiosity. "I didn't expect to find anyone here," he said, his tone kind but cautious. "Are you all right?" Lyra looked at him warily. I'm fine," she said softly, her voice trembling. The man stepped closer, his eyes studying her. "You don't look fine. What happened to you?" "I've been abandoned," Lyra replied bitterly. "I was cast out, left here to die." The man's face softened with sympathy. He looked at her as if he saw something more than just a lost princess. There was a spark of understanding in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice sincere. "My name is Mark. I'm part of a crew on a ship that was exploring this region. We weren't expecting to find anyone out here, especially not someone like you." Lyra frowned. "Someone like me?" Mark nodded. "Yes. I've never seen anyone quite like you before. You don't look like the people of this planet." Lyra couldn't help but feel a strange sense of connection to him. He didn't see her as a monster or a failure. He saw her as something else, something worth saving. Mark studied the princess with curiosity, noting the strange aura around her. She seemed different from any species he had encountered before. Her skin shimmered with a faint glow, and her eyes held a sadness that he couldn't ignore. It was clear she had been through a lot, and he felt a strong pull to help her. "Why don't you come aboard our ship?" Mark asked gently, his voice warm and inviting. "It's not much, but it's safe, and we can get you out of here." Lyra hesitated, her mind racing. The idea of trusting another person, especially a stranger, seemed impossible. But something in Mark's eyes made her feel like he wasn't a threat. For the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of hope. "Are you sure?" Lyra asked, her voice uncertain. Mark smiled reassuringly. "I'm sure. We'll help you however we can." Lyra felt a flicker of hope rise within her. Maybe this was the moment she had been waiting for, the chance to escape the endless loneliness of this dead planet. Maybe, just maybe, she could find a new path, one where she wouldn't be feared and rejected. With a deep breath, she stepped forward, her eyes locked on Mark's. "All right, I'll come with you." Mark led the way back to the ship, and Lyra followed. As she walked, she couldn't help but feel that this was the beginning of something new, something that might change everything. The ship, a sleek silver craft with glowing blue lights, was unlike anything Lyra had ever seen. It looked like something out of a dream, a ship built for exploration and adventure. Mark led her inside, where she was greeted by the rest of his crew. They were a diverse group, each one eyeing her with curiosity but not fear. She felt a sense of relief wash over her. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like an outsider. "We're just finishing up some repairs," Mark explained, gesturing to the crew members who were working on various systems of the ship. "It'll take a few hours before we're ready to leave." Lyra nodded, grateful for the time to rest. She found a quiet corner and sat down, her mind still swirling with thoughts of her past and what the future might hold. She had been abandoned, cast aside like a broken thing, but now she had the chance to start over. For the first time in a long time, Lyra allowed herself to dream. As the hours passed, the ship's crew worked quickly to prepare for departure. Lyra sat quietly in the corner, her mind still racing. She tried to focus on the peaceful hum of the ship, but her thoughts kept returning to the harsh life she had left behind. The memories of being abandoned by her people, the rejection, and the cruel words of her stepmother, Queen Siren, echoed in her mind. Mark, sensing her unease, approached her. He sat down beside her, his presence calm and reassuring. "You're safe now. We're almost ready to leave this planet," he said softly. Lyra looked at him, trying to smile. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. I don't know where I would have been if you hadn't found me." Mark nodded. "You don't have to thank me. You deserve better than being stuck on a planet like this." Lyra's gaze drifted out of the ship's window, watching the barren landscape below. It was hard to believe that she had once been a princess, that she had once belonged to something. Now she was just a fugitive, a lost soul in the vastness of space. As the ship's engines roared to life, the crew gathered in the main area, preparing for the flight. Mark stood at the front, giving orders. "Get ready, everyone. We're leaving this planet behind, heading to uncharted space. Keep an eye out for anything unusual." Lyra felt a rush of excitement mixed with fear. She was leaving the only place she had ever known, but she was also escaping the cruelty of her past. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of freedom. As the ship lifted off the surface and ascended into the sky, Lyra's heart raced. The ground beneath her faded away, and soon the planet became a small dot in the distance. It was a strange feeling, relief mixed with sadness. She was leaving everything behind, but at the same time, she was taking the first steps towards something new. The ship traveled faster than she had ever imagined, leaving the planet far behind. The crew moved quickly, making sure everything was in order. Lyra sat quietly, observing them. She had never been around humans before, and she found their ways of working both fascinating and strange. They communicated quickly, working together without speaking much. It was a strange kind of teamwork that Lyra had never known among her own people. As they entered space, Mark approached her again. "We'll be safe for now, but we can't stay in one place for too long. If your stepmother's forces are still looking for you, we'll have to keep moving." Lyra nodded, understanding the danger. "I know. I don't want to bring any harm to your crew. I just need a place to hide, somewhere I can be free." Mark smiled gently. "You'll be free, Lyra. We won't let anything happen to you." As the ship soared through the stars, Lyra felt a sense of calm wash over her. She was not alone anymore. For the first time, she had people who cared about her. The weight of her past still hung over her, but she could sense that things were changing. There was a future ahead of her, a future that didn't involve rejection or fear. However, the danger wasn't over. As they entered deeper space, a warning alarm suddenly blared through the ship. The crew scrambled, moving quickly to their stations. Lyra looked around in confusion, her heart beginning to race again. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice shaking. Mark turned to her, his face serious. "It's them. Queen Siren's fleet. They found us." Lyra's stomach dropped. The hope she had felt just moments ago began to fade as fear took its place. "They're coming for me," she whispered. "I knew they wouldn't just let me go." Mark grabbed her arm, his grip firm. "Listen to me, Lyra. We'll get through this. We're not going down without a fight." The crew rushed to their stations, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. Lyra stood frozen, unsure of what to do. She didn't know how to fight. She didn't know how to defend herself against an entire fleet. Her powers, once a source of fear and isolation, seemed useless now. How could she face a force like this? "Lyra," Mark called, pulling her out of her thoughts. "I need you to stay focused. We need to make sure they can't track us." Lyra nodded, but the fear in her heart grew. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was putting Mark and his crew in danger. She had to do something. She had to prove that she wasn't just a helpless princess. As the alarms blared louder, Lyra's mind began to race. Her powers, the same powers that had once terrified her, might be the only thing that could save them now. She had no idea how to control them fully, but she knew that she had to try. Mark turned to her. "Lyra, we need your help. I know you can do this. You've got the strength inside you." Her breath caught in her throat. Mark's words were exactly what she needed to hear. She had to trust herself. She had to stop running from her powers and learn to use them. Taking a deep breath, Lyra closed her eyes. She focused on the energy inside her, feeling it hum and pulse within her chest. Slowly, she extended her hands, trying to channel the energy she had kept hidden for so long. The ship shook as Lyra's power surged to life. The air around her crackled with energy as she focused, trying to send a pulse strong enough to hide them from the enemy's radar. It was difficult, and the energy felt wild, like a storm inside her. But Lyra refused to give up. She pushed harder, focusing all her will on protecting the ship. Suddenly, the ship's systems beeped, signaling that the enemy was no longer able to track them. Lyra opened her eyes, exhausted but relieved. Her powers had worked, at least for now. Mark smiled at her, his expression full of pride. "You did it. You really did it." Lyra breathed heavily, her heart still racing. She had taken control of her powers. For the first time, she realized that she wasn't just a helpless princess. She was a force to be reckoned with. The ship sailed through the stars, the hum of the engine steady and calm. Mark and his crew had done their best to avoid Queen Saran's fleet, but Lyra knew they couldn't hide forever. They had to find a safe place, somewhere far from the reach of her enemies. The crew worked tirelessly, monitoring their ship's systems and scanning for any signs of danger. Lyra stayed in the main room, watching them, her mind constantly racing. For the first time in months, she felt like she might have a chance at something more, something better than the life she had left behind. But there were still so many unanswered questions. Why had Queen Saran been so determined to get rid of her? What did Lyra's strange powers mean? And why did she feel a strange connection to Mark and his crew? Mark noticed her sitting quietly, lost in thought. He had come to admire her strength. Despite everything she had gone through, she hadn't given up. He understood that the road ahead would be difficult, but he also knew that Lyra had something special inside her, something worth fighting for. He walked over to her and smiled. "How are you holding up?" Lyra glanced up, surprised by the question. She had expected to be treated like a burden, but Mark's kindness made her feel different. I'm okay," she said quietly. "I just keep thinking about everything that happened back home. I don't know if I can ever go back." Mark nodded. "I understand, but you don't have to go back to that life. You have a new chance now, a new beginning. You're not alone." Lyra's heart fluttered at his words. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she could believe in something. Maybe there was a future for her after all. As the days passed, the crew continued their journey. They traveled through unfamiliar space, seeking refuge in the quiet corners of the galaxy. It was dangerous, but they were careful. Lyra stayed close to Mark, growing more comfortable with his presence. She began to trust him, not just because he had saved her, but because he treated her like a person, not a problem. One evening, as they sat together, Lyra looked out at the stars. "Do you ever wonder if there's more out there?" she asked softly. "More than just the battles and the wars, more than just power and control." Mark looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "I think there's always more. You just have to be willing to find it. Maybe that's why we're here, out in this part of space. Maybe we're supposed to help people like you." Lyra turned to him, surprised by his words. "Help people like me?" Mark nodded. "You've got a lot of power inside you, Lyra. I can see it. But you also have something else, something that a lot of people don't have. You've got the heart to use it for good." Lyra felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. It was strange to think that she, someone who had been cast out and forgotten, could have the power to do good. But Mark believed in her. Maybe she could believe in herself too. The crew's journey led them to a quiet planet, one that seemed to be hidden from most of the galaxy. It was small and peaceful, with green fields and sparkling rivers. The air was clean and fresh, a sharp contrast to the harsh, barren world Lyra had been forced to call home. The moment she stepped onto the surface, she felt a sense of calm she had never known before. "This is it," Mark said, looking around. "We can rest here for a while. This place is safe. No one will find us." Lyra gazed around, taking in the beauty of the planet. It was peaceful, untouched by war or the darkness of the universe. For the first time, she felt like she could breathe. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was free. The crew set up camp on the planet, settling into a small, quiet community near a lake. Lyra spent her days exploring, learning about the planet's simple yet beautiful life. She found comfort in the quiet nature of the place, the absence of conflict, and the kindness of Mark and the crew. But the more she learned about the planet, the more she realized that something was off. There were no large cities, no advanced technology, just peaceful villages scattered across the land. It was almost as if this place had been left behind by the rest of the galaxy. One day, while walking along the shore of the lake, Lyra met an elderly woman who lived in a small house by the water. The woman was kind and wise, and Lyra felt drawn to her. They began to talk, and Lyra found herself sharing her story. The woman listened patiently, nodding as Lyra spoke about her past and her exile. "You've been through so much," the woman said gently, "but you've come here for a reason. This place is not as simple as it seems." Lyra looked at the woman, confused. "What do you mean?" The woman smiled, her eyes twinkling. "This planet has a long history, a history that is connected to your powers. You're not the first one to come here seeking peace." Lyra felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean? What does this place have to do with me?" The woman didn't answer immediately. Instead, she took Lyra's hand and led her to a hidden cave near the lake. Inside the cave, Lyra saw ancient carvings on the walls, strange symbols and drawings that seemed to tell a story. As she stepped closer, she saw one symbol that caught her eye. It was a circle, surrounded by rays of light, just like the energy she had always felt inside herself. "This is where your journey begins," the woman said softly. "This planet holds the key to unlocking your true power, and it will help you understand why you were chosen." Lyra's heart pounded as she stared at the symbol. Could this place really hold the answers she had been searching for? Could she truly find a way to control her powers, to use them for good? The answers were out there, hidden in the stars, and Lyra was determined to find them. Lyra sat in front of the ancient carvings, her mind swirling with questions. The symbols on the cave walls were like nothing she had ever seen before. They seemed to pulse with an energy that felt strangely familiar, like they were speaking to something deep inside her. The more she looked at them, the more she felt connected to the place, as if this was where her journey was meant to lead. The old woman, whose name was Mara, stood beside her, watching Lyra closely. "These symbols," Mara began, "are the key to understanding who you are and why you've been brought here. They tell a story of an ancient power, one that has been passed down through generations. And you, Lyra, are part of that story." Lyra looked up at her, confused. "But how can that be? I'm just a runaway princess with strange abilities. I don't know anything about this power." Mara smiled gently, her eyes filled with wisdom. "You've always known more than you think. Your powers are not just a gift, they're a responsibility. This planet has been waiting for someone like you, someone who can unlock the ancient energy that lies within." Lyra's heart raced as Mara's words sank in. She had always struggled with her powers, never fully understanding them. At times, they felt like a curse, something she could never control. But now, sitting in the quiet cave, surrounded by the strange symbols, she began to wonder if her powers could be more than she had ever imagined. Mara pointed to one of the carvings, a swirling pattern that seemed to connect with the other symbols. "This is the symbol of balance," she explained. "It represents the harmony between all things, the energy you feel inside you. It's the energy of the universe itself. But in order to harness it, you must learn to find balance within yourself." Lyra frowned. "Balance? How do I find that?" Mara's eyes softened. "By accepting who you are, Lyra. You cannot fight your powers, and you cannot hide from them. They are part of you. Once you accept them, you will be able to control them. But it won't be easy. It will take time and patience." Lyra looked back at the carvings, her mind racing. Could she really control the power inside her? Could she really learn to use it for good, instead of fearing it? "You must practice," Mara continued. "The more you connect with the energy of this planet, the more you will understand your true potential. But you must be careful. Power, when left unchecked, can destroy everything." Lyra nodded slowly. She knew what Mara was saying was true. She had already seen what her powers could do when they went out of control. She didn't want that to happen again. "Take your time," Mara added. "There is no rush. The planet will guide you." Over the next few days, Lyra spent her time in the cave, studying the carvings and meditating. She could feel the energy of the planet beneath her, a gentle hum that seemed to connect her to everything around her. She practiced focusing on the energy inside her, trying to direct it with her mind. At first, it was difficult. Her powers were wild, unpredictable, and it often felt like she was fighting against them. But slowly, she began to feel a shift. Each day, the energy inside her seemed to grow stronger. She could control small bursts of it, causing the air around her to shimmer and ripple. Sometimes, she would feel the ground beneath her tremble as her power surged. But with each attempt, she felt herself growing more in control. One afternoon, as Lyra sat in front of the carvings, something changed. She felt a sudden connection to the energy of the planet, as if the very land beneath her was alive and working with her. The symbols on the cave walls seemed to glow with a soft, golden light. Lyra closed her eyes, focusing on the feeling of the energy flowing through her. For the first time, she felt at peace. The power inside her was no longer a burden. It was a part of her, a part of everything. She could feel the connection to the stars, the plants, the animals, and the people of the planet. She was no longer alone. The universe was with her. When Lyra opened her eyes, the cave was filled with light. The symbols on the walls were glowing brightly, and she could see a path laid out before her, an invisible thread that seemed to guide her forward. Lyra stood up, her heart racing with excitement. She had done it. She had found the balance she had been searching for. Her powers were no longer something to fear. They were a gift she could use to protect herself and those she cared about. But as the light faded and the cave grew quiet once again, Lyra knew that her journey wasn't over. There was still much to learn, still much to understand. Mark had told her that they couldn't stay on this planet forever. Queen Saran's forces would still be searching for her, and Lyra couldn't afford to stay hidden. She had to be ready for what lay ahead. She had to be ready to face the dangers that would come when the time came to fight. As Lyra stepped out of the cave and into the sunlight, she felt a new sense of purpose. Her past, her exile, the pain she had endured, all of it had led her to this moment. She was stronger now, and she would not be a victim anymore. She would fight for her future, for the people she loved, and for the freedom she deserved. She could feel the energy inside her, pulsing with life. She was no longer just a runaway princess. She was something more, something greater, and she was ready to face whatever came next. Mark was waiting for her when she returned to the camp. He saw the change in her immediately. The uncertainty in her eyes was gone, replaced by a new confidence. "You've done it," he said, his voice full of admiration. Lyra smiled. "I've found the balance, and I'm ready to fight." Mark nodded, his eyes filled with pride. "Then we'll face whatever comes next together." Lyra looked around at the crew, who were working to prepare for their next move. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid. She had the power to protect herself, and the strength to protect those she cared about. Lyra felt different now. Her time on the peaceful planet had transformed her. She was no longer the frightened, confused princess who had been abandoned by her people. The energy inside her had become something she could control, something she could use to protect herself and others. But even though she had found balance, Lyra knew the danger wasn't over. The threat of Queen Saran's forces still loomed over her, and she couldn't hide forever. The crew couldn't stay on this quiet planet indefinitely. Eventually, they would have to leave, and Lyra would have to face her past head-on. The peaceful days on the planet had allowed her to heal, but the world outside was not as kind. She could feel the storm approaching, a storm of uncertainty, danger, and decisions that would shape her future. The crew had gathered together in the small camp that morning. Mark was standing at the center, a serious look on his face. His usual calm demeanor had shifted. They had been waiting for news, but it was clear now that the time for hiding was over. "We've been spotted," Mark said, his voice steady but filled with tension. "Queen Saran's fleet has tracked us down. They're getting closer." Lyra's stomach tightened at the sound of the news. She had known this day would come, but now that it was here, she felt her heart race with fear. The peaceful life she had started to build here was about to be shattered. She glanced around at the crew. They had all been kind to her, had accepted her when she had nowhere else to go. Now they would all be in danger because of her. "We have to leave," Mark continued, looking directly at Lyra. "There's no time to waste. We need to get to the ship and move quickly. If we stay here, they'll find us." Lyra nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in her chest. The peaceful days, the quiet moments of reflection, were slipping away, replaced by the chaos of battle and running. She had known it wouldn't last, but she had hoped, just for a little while, she could escape. The crew quickly gathered their things and prepared to leave. Mark and Lyra shared one last look before heading toward the ship. It was time to move, time to leave the safety of the planet behind. As they made their way to the ship, Lyra felt a sense of finality. There was no going back now. Whatever happened next, she had to face it. She was no longer the frightened princess. She was something more, something stronger. The ship's engines roared to life as they boarded, and Lyra felt the familiar rush of power as the ship lifted off the surface. She looked out of the window at the planet below, the place that had given her peace. It would always be a part of her now, but she couldn't stay. There were bigger things ahead. "Everyone's on board," Mark said as he entered the cockpit, taking his place at the controls. "We're ready to go." Lyra nodded, trying to focus on what was ahead. They couldn't stay here. They had to keep moving. She felt the weight of her responsibility, the burden of her past, pressing down on her. But she also felt something else, a sense of resolve, of strength. She had learned to control her powers, and now she had to learn to face the challenges ahead. "Where are we heading?" she asked, her voice steady but full of uncertainty. "We need to find a safe place," Mark said, glancing at her. "Somewhere we can regroup, make a plan. We can't fight Queen Siren head-on, not yet, but we need to stay ahead of her forces." Lyra nodded again, understanding. They couldn't take on an entire fleet by themselves. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the crew, about finding a way to survive long enough to strike back. As they jumped into faster-than-light travel, Lyra sat quietly in the back of the ship, her mind racing. What would happen when they confronted Queen Siren? Would she ever be able to truly escape her past? The feeling of being hunted, of never knowing when the next attack would come, it was a heavy burden to bear. She couldn't help but think about the woman she had been, the princess who had been marked as flawed by her stepmother, the one who had been cast aside. It felt like a lifetime ago, but the memories were still fresh in her mind. It was hard to forget the way Queen Siren had treated her, the way she had been abandoned without a second thought. And now, Lyra was about to face that same woman, the woman who had betrayed her and sent her into exile. "I don't want to go back to that," Lyra whispered to herself, clenching her fists. She had worked so hard to escape. She couldn't let it all slip away now. Just then, Mark entered the room and sat beside her. "We're almost to our destination. We'll be safe for now." Lyra looked up at him, grateful for his constant support. He had been her rock during all of this, someone she could rely on, someone who saw her as more than just a princess in hiding. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything." Mark smiled, his eyes softening. "You don't need to thank me, Lyra. You're not alone in this. We're all in this together." Lyra felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. She had spent so long feeling alone, abandoned, that hearing those words meant more than she could express. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone anymore. As the ship sped through the stars, Lyra closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with danger and challenges, but she was ready. She had her powers, she had her strength, and she had a team of people who cared for her. She was no longer the princess who had been cast aside. She was someone new, someone who was going to fight for her future. And she wasn't going to let anyone, not even Queen Siren, take that away from her. The ship surged forward through the vast emptiness of space, heading toward a distant planet. Mark and his crew worked together, preparing for what lay ahead. Every one of them knew the dangers they were about to face. Queen Siren's fleet was closing in, and this time there would be no escaping it. Lyra stood by the window, staring out at the stars. Her mind was focused, calm, and steady. The balance she had found within herself was stronger than ever. She had trained with her powers, learned to control them, and now she felt ready to confront the past that had haunted her for so long. But even with all the strength she had gained, she knew this wouldn't be an easy fight. Queen Siren was ruthless. She had spent years chasing after Lyra, trying to destroy her. And now it was time for them to meet again. "We're almost there." Mark's voice broke through Lyra's thoughts. She turned to face him. His expression was serious, but there was a spark of determination in his eyes. "Do you think we can beat her?" Lyra asked, her voice soft but filled with uncertainty. Mark paused for a moment, then nodded. "I believe we can. We have the advantage. You've gained control over your powers, and we've got each other. That's what's going to make the difference." Lyra felt a sense of calm wash over her. Mark was right. They weren't alone. She wasn't alone. The crew had become more than just allies. They had become her family. And together, they would face whatever came next. The planet below was a small, rocky world, with towering cliffs and deep, shadowed valleys. It wasn't the most welcoming of places, but it was the perfect location for the final confrontation. The crew had already set up a base there, ready to fight if necessary. As the ship descended toward the planet's surface, Lyra's mind raced. She could feel the familiar energy of her powers flowing through her, but she knew it wouldn't be enough on its own. She had to think strategically. They needed a plan. "We're almost on the ground," Mark said, snapping her out of her thoughts. "Get ready." The ship touched down with a soft thud, and the crew immediately sprang into action. Mark and the others suited up, checking their weapons and equipment. Lyra watched them, taking in their movements. She knew they were ready. She was ready. But as the final moments of preparation passed, a deep sense of dread settled in her chest. The sound of an approaching ship broke the silence. The crew's heads snapped up, eyes widening as the enemy vessel appeared in the sky above. It was Queen Siren's flagship, a massive dark ship that seemed to swallow the light around it. Lyra clenched her fists, her heart pounding. The time had come. Queen Siren was here, and the battle was about to begin. The crew rushed to their positions, taking cover behind large rocks and outcroppings. Mark gave Lyra a quick look, his expression filled with understanding. "We'll keep her forces busy. You focus on Queen Siren," he said. Lyra nodded. She didn't need to be told twice. This was her fight, the moment she had been waiting for. The first wave of enemy soldiers charged toward them, weapons raised. Lyra felt the surge of energy inside her as she reached out with her mind. She focused on the power within her, the force that she had learned to control over the past few months. With a deep breath, she released it. A powerful blast of energy shot out from her hands, knocking the first wave of soldiers off their feet. The ground shook beneath her as she directed the force outward, sending shockwaves that tore through the enemy ranks. The soldiers scattered, but they quickly regrouped and launched another attack. Lyra's heart raced as she fought back, using her powers to push and shove, to knock enemies off their feet. She had learned to control the energy inside her, but the intensity of the battle was unlike anything she had ever experienced. The raw power she wielded was both exhilarating and terrifying. From behind the rocks, Mark and a crew fired their weapons at the enemy, providing cover for Lyra as she advanced. It was a coordinated effort, each of them playing their part. The ground was littered with the sounds of explosions, laser blasts, and the cries of soldiers as they fell. But in the midst of the chaos, Lyra felt something shift. A chill ran down her spine as she sensed Queen Siren's presence. The Queen's ship was hovering above them now, and Lyra could feel her cold, calculating gaze on her. She was waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Lyra's breath quickened as she turned to face the ship. She couldn't let Queen Siren get away this time. This fight would end today. The air seemed to crackle with tension as Queen Siren appeared on the battlefield, flanked by her most trusted soldiers. She stood tall and imposing, her armor gleaming in the light, her eyes locked onto Lyra, full of hatred and rage. "So you think you can defeat me, little princess?" Queen Siren's voice was cold and cruel, cutting through the noise of battle. Lyra stood tall, the weight of her powers pressing against her, but she didn't falter. "I'm not the princess you cast aside anymore. I'm something more, and I'm not afraid of you." The queen's lips curled into a smile, but it was empty, devoid of any warmth. "You're a fool, Lyra. You can't defeat me. No one can." Lyra raised her hands, channeling the energy within her. She could feel the connection to the planet, the stars, the universe itself. Her power surged, and for a brief moment, everything around her seemed to slow down. She was ready. With a scream, Lyra released all of the energy she had gathered. A massive wave of force erupted from her, crashing into Queen Siren and her soldiers. The blast sent shockwaves through the battlefield, knocking everyone off their feet. Queen Siren struggled to stand, but Lyra didn't stop. She gathered more energy, focusing all of her strength on the queen. This time, there was no hesitation. There was no mercy. Queen Siren raised her hand to defend herself, but it was too late. Lyra's energy engulfed her, and the queen screamed as she was overwhelmed by the power. The battle was over. Lyra stood, panting heavily, her body shaking from the exertion. The battlefield around her was silent. The enemy had been defeated, and Queen Siren was gone. Mark and the crew approached her slowly, their faces filled with awe and respect. Lyra had done it. She had faced her past, confronted her enemy, and come out victorious. "We did it," Mark said, his voice filled with pride. Lyra nodded, her heart still racing. She had won, but the fight had changed her. She was no longer the frightened princess. She was a warrior, and this was only the beginning of her new life.